We are learning of more missed warning signs for the company behind the Titan submersible that imploded on a mission to the Titanic. According to the New Yorker, David Lockridge, who was a former OceanGate employee who claims that he was wrongfully terminated for raising red flags, once sent an ominous email to a colleague about the doomed vessel, writing, "That sub is an accident waiting to happen." He also added this about then CEO Stockton Rush. He said, "I don't want to be seen as a tattletale, but I'm worried he kills himself and others in a quest to boost his ego." Rush, of course, was among 5 people who died in the tragedy. Joining me now is Ben Taub of The New Yorker, who wrote this really incredible story, Ben. And you obtained this never-before-seen report by David Lockridge, the fired OceanGate employee, and it details so many issues that he found with the sub during an inspection. Tell us more about what he found in this report.
Sure. Yeah, David Lockridge was perhaps the only highly experienced submarine pilot who worked at OceanGate at the time, and he was hired as their director of marine operations. And as part of that role, as they transitioned from the building phase into the testing phase, he was required to sign off that this was safe to dive. So he was raising concerns on the factory floor for much of the latter half of 2017 and was just constantly being dismissed, at which point he decided he was going to take this serious inspection report and he was going to detail everything in writing and submit it in writing to Stockton Rush, the CEO, and Tony Nissen, the director of engineering. And in this, over the next sort of day it was January 18th, 2018, so more than 5 years ago, Lockridge inspected every major component of the sub and found that glue was coming away from the seams of the ballast bags. You had mounting bolts threatening to rupture things, ceiling faces that had errant plunge holes, O-ring grooves that deviated from standard parameters. Everything that could go wrong was sort of going wrong. There were snagging hazards, there were important components attached with zip ties, flammable flooring, and the interior vinyl wrapping would emit highly toxic gases upon ignition. But the number one concern for Lockridge was that the actual core of this submarine, the pressure boundary, which is what keeps people alive at 3,800 meters where Titanic is, where the external water pressure is about 6,000 pounds per square inch, is made of carbon fiber, which is not used in deep ocean submersibles because under compression, it's a capricious material. It's not made to be used under compression. It's fibers. It's like rope. It's strong under tension, but not under compression. So he examined a section of it and found that it was filled with little holes. It was delaminating these layers. It was porous. He held a light behind it and found that the light was streaming through, and he refused to sign off on the dive. And Stockton Rush said that because you refused to sign off on this manned testing, you cannot do your job as director of marine operations, and so he fired him on the spot.
Yeah, in a way, he was doing the job, Ben, and he was fired for doing his job. And you have to wonder what would have happened if he'd been able to actually do his job. So you have in this, you also share instances where Rush, he seems to take personal offense to criticism, right? Because Lockridge knows people outside of OceanGate, and there's a co-head of a company that actually has a classed titanium sub. Of course, this sub, the submersible that imploded, it was not classed. And this co-head of this company says to him, basically warning him, and he lashes out, Stockton Rush does, saying that he's tired of industry players who try to use a safety argument to stop innovation. He seemed so confident that he was doing something new and different, and that he was being stymied by people saying it was in the name of safety, but he seemed convinced it wasn't, even though truly, clearly it was.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this tragedy comes down to hubris. It was a matter of this kind of, Silicon Valley disruptor attitude, but it wasn't about beating the other companies. It was about trying to beat physics. And you're not going to win that. And they didn't win that. And it was sort of blindingly obvious for years that this sub was not being constructed in a manner that would work under great pressure. You can build a sub that's experimental, but you can't take passengers in it. That's completely illegal. And so they structured the company such that it was falling outside of US jurisdiction in various ways. They had all kinds of sort of steps taken so that they weren't actually passengers. They were categorized as mission specialists. But how can you have a 19-year-old kid who's terrified of going inside,
Sure.
specialists? It's completely incoherent, and I imagine that this will, this will continue for a long time in courts, because you can only call something an accident if it's truly an accident. And if there's 5 years of very explicit warnings from engineers explaining this is how it will implode, and you refuse to take them seriously, there has to come a point where someone takes responsibility for that. Dave Lockridge, for his part, after he was fired.
What's the lesson here on classing? Because he was so Stockton Rush resistant to having his submersible classed, and yet what is so clear in your report is how essential that process is to providing a submersible that is safe for people to go to these depths.
Yeah, 3,800 meters is not actually, it is an extreme depth, let's be clear, but it's not unprecedented. Nothing he was doing was breaking boundaries. The boundary breaking part of this operation was to try to do it in a sub that was unclassed and was clearly designed to do what it did, which was to fail. Class submarines have been going to the Titanic since the 80s. One of the guys in my article had been leading tours to the Titanic in the mid-2000s using Soviet submarines that were built in the 80s. Others in the article, because I happened to be at sea with them some years ago for a much more sort of serious venture where they were sending a manned submersible that was classed to the deepest point in each ocean. The deepest point in the Pacific Ocean is 11,000 meters. It's triple the depth of Titanic. And for that sub, they took the guy from the classification agency to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. He signed that it was unlimited depth at 11,000 meters down. And for that sub, in a titanium spherical hull, which evenly distributes the pressure, not a cylinder which will get crushed under pressure, that titanium sphere hull, the Titanic didn't even count as a dive for classification and insurance reasons. Every 100 dives you have to do inspections, but the threshold for them was 4,000 meters. And if it's above 4,000, Titanic's 3,800, it's not even a dive. So the notion that Stockton Rush was doing something innovative is a complete lie. And basically he had to change the narrative around the point that it became clear that they would never get it classed because it was going to be a failure. And the way that they did that was to sort of lie to their mission specialists, again, their passengers who they'd misclassified on purpose for legal reasons, that this, they stopped trying to say that it was safe. They started telling them explicitly, oh yeah, it's incredibly dangerous. You might die. You have to sign a waiver. This is an experimental sub, which was true. But the lie there was that this is how serious exploration is done. It's not how it's done at all. And a last thing that I just need to make very clear is that Dave Lockridge actually did raise this with the US government. After he was fired, he was so concerned about what was going on that he shared his report with OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And that report was then passed on from OSHA to the US Coast Guard. And there's no evidence of any follow-up from there. That was in March of 2018.
Yeah, you make that so clear. He tried to raise some flags, and in the end, he was buried in legal bills, as you describe in your report. Ben, excellent reporting. I think it's such an important lesson for so many people, not just when it comes to submersibles and deep ocean exploration, but anything that could be unsafe. It's a really important read, so thank you for being with us and sharing it.